Para continuar, vamos a dar paso a la Conferencia Internacional Aseguramiento de la Calidad en Educación Superior, Regulación y Autorregulación, a cargo de la doctora Judith Eaton. Ella es presidenta del Consejo para la Acreditación de la Educación Superior de Estados Unidos. Bienvenida.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, dear. Good afternoon. No, it's my pleasure and it's an honor to be here. I was delighted to be invited to join you today. I want to talk about several things, and here they are. First, offer a few comments about self-regulation and regulation when it comes to quality assurance. Second, to talk about some international trends in higher education. We are all in touch with one another. Increasingly, the context for our work is international. What is happening? And third, to particularly focused on what I consider to be some major changes in higher education, because both the international trends and the major changes are affecting quality assurance. So what is happening to quality assurance internationally? What kinds of changes are likely, and what are the expected results of the changes and the trends? Self-regulation or regulation. When we talk about self-regulation, we're talking about colleges and universities, the academic community, making certain judgments, setting standards or criteria for quality, judging it. Typically, when we talk about self-regulation, we're talking about peer review. We in the academic community judging ourselves, academics reviewing academics, and typically the judgments that we make are qualitative in nature. They may involve some quantitative data, but there's a good deal of qualitative information available, and we make formative and not so much summative judgments. Well, I don't know what it's asking me or whether to say yes or no, so. Sure. Thank you. Why couldn't I do that?
Okay.
All right. And in our work in a self-regulatory context, our primary concern is for quality improvement. Yes, we want minimum or threshold quality, but we are particularly focused on quality improvement. We want to get better at what we do. It's part of our social obligation. It's part of the commitment that all of us as academics make when we came into our respective fields. Regulation, on the other hand, is about either government or stakeholders, constituents with an interest in higher education, the public, students, employers, for example. Regulation is about those individuals having a major say in the determination of quality standards, in judging quality, and oftentimes regulation takes on a distinctive compliance complexion. That is, are you meeting certain threshold obligations or not? It is summative. Are you doing the work that has to be done? And with regulation, there is oftentimes, not always, but there's oftentimes a tendency toward centralization and standardization, and oftentimes regulation involves political considerations, and of course that's not a surprise to any of us working with government where politics as well as policy are a fact of life. Yes, we have higher education politics, but that's a bit different, if you will. Now, regulation and self-regulation have coexisted for a very long time, and there are different models for that relationship. We in the United States have a model that has been dominated until fairly recently by self-regulation. It is a very, very long-standing part of our culture, going all the way back to the 19th century, and the determination that both public and private institutions of higher education would be governed by governing boards of those colleges and universities, and not our government. All right? If you look at the UK and then you look at related countries, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, you have longstanding traditions of academic authority coupled with significant government authority when it comes to higher education and when it comes to quality. And more recently, if we look back over the last 20 years and the enormous growth of quality assurance capacities in countries all over the world, we see quality assurance often emerging from government itself. So self-regulation and regulation are with us, and they are characteristic of what goes on in many different countries, but in many different ways. And this produces a kind of a dilemma that's ongoing. What is the role of government in higher education and quality assurance? Are we who are concerned with quality assurance supposed to be looking at compliance with minimum standards, or are we supposed to be primarily focused on quality improvement? Yes, we have a policy role. Yes, politics, as I said earlier, are a fact of life. How do we deal with that? Who leads higher education? Is it the academic community? Is it government? Is it some combination of both? And related to that, who decides quality? The debate and discussion, I submit, will not go away. And we're talking about distribution of authority, distribution of responsibility, and in some cases, we're talking about the exercise of power. So framing the issue of regulation or self-regulation is not about either or. It's about a relationship and what's the appropriate balance at a given time in a given society. Let me move now to the issue of trends in higher education internationally. And I have 5 here, and I'll go into each of them in a bit of detail. But let me say this, I do a good deal of traveling internationally. I'm in a variety of countries, and wherever I go, these 5 trends are clearly visible. We are, however disconnected we may be in the effort, we are all attempting to meet similar challenges. We might frame them a bit differently. We might answer the challenges a bit differently. Foremost is this demand for greater access to higher education, for more mobility for students, and a very, very strong emphasis on student success. A second trend is the emphasis on innovation. Can we do higher education differently from the way we're doing it now and make sure that it's a desirable and quality experience? What about funding for higher education? We've had a lot of challenges here of late. And what about affordability for students? And we all know the amount of money available has a good deal to do with affordability for students. Quality has become, the fourth trend, quality has become an urgent issue in many, many countries for a variety of reasons. And in some countries, avoiding corruption has become an issue as well. With regard to demands for greater access, we all talk about more students obtaining degrees, more students completing their educational goals, whatever they are. We talk about education for work or lifelong learning. That is, it's not simply an issue of let's obtain a degree and I'm done with my education anymore. the changing economy, the changing nature of work have made education an ongoing experience. And in many, many countries, we worry about international competitiveness. And this is not just about the issue of who's the best or who's the worst. It's about the labor market. It's about our economies. It's about the survival of our society economically and socially. We're also concerned about enrollment growth. Going from essentially selective higher education a number of years ago to what many people call mass higher education, making higher education available to as many people as possible. Innovation. Traditional higher education, that is institutions that offer degrees or in some cases certificates, has been the norm, as we all know, for hundreds of years. The classroom experience, faculty and students face-to-face. We're seeing an enormous challenge here throughout the world. MOOCs, massive open online courses, educational activity apart from a higher education institutions have taken hold. They're not driving higher education, but they have attracted large numbers of students. We talk more and more about competency-based education, that is educational experience judged by what a student can do, what proficiencies a student may have as distinct from the traditional classroom experience. We talk more and more about assessment of prior learning. That is, I've had certain life experiences. How do they translate into evidence of skills that can count toward a degree or certificate? And we're seeing more and more providers of some kind of higher education apart from traditional higher education institutions beyond MOOCs. We're seeing private companies go into higher education. We're seeing badges or compilations of evidence of various skills that students may have. Now, MOOCs are new. 2008, competency-based education and assessment of prior learning have been around for a good number of years. They're seeing a renaissance right now, and non-institutional providers, that is, providers of some education experience apart from traditional institutions, have been around, but not to the extent that we are seeing this develop now. If we look at the funding and affordability trend, we see more and more countries moving to a tuition model for students when education had been free. We're seeing more and more countries attempt to strengthen their emphasis on writing, on fighting successfully economic inequality through education. Economic inequality in particular is tied to access. And quality, governments more and more want to know, what can students do? What do they know? And they're not assuming, as perhaps at one time governments did, we have our higher education institutions and we're concerned about sustaining them, and we're concerned about student attendance, and we know everything will be okay. Now we're having very tough questions put to us on a regular basis, tough questions about quality, and we're seeing governments in more and more countries, certainly mine, take a much more emphatic role in the quality issue. With regard to avoiding corruption, there are degree mills out there, rogue providers of credentials. Just go online. You can have a PhD for $2,500 US or $500 US by the time you leave here if you're on your PDA right now. There are accreditation mills out there. That is, organizations set up to award accreditation for some money and maybe submitting a few papers. We don't want these rogue providers. They harm students and they harm society. And we've got instances of selling degrees, selling admission to an institution, or selling credits. And corruption in the system harms students the most. It means that students who were not sophisticated about seeking educational opportunity can wind up with debt and can wind up with phony credentials, neither of which is helpful. Let me provide a few examples here. Enrollment growth. 97 million students worldwide in 2000, doubled in 2012, and the estimate is we'll have 412 million students worldwide by 2030. Not that far away. Funding, tuition, and affordability. I was reading an article recently. Funding is down in a good number of European countries. It's up in several, but in almost all cases except one, enrollment is up. How do we sustain greater enrollments and reduced funding? In the United States, we are having a major challenge around tuition increases and rapidly rising student debt. Student debt now equals $1.2 billion US. That's higher than all the credit card debt in the country combined. Tuition increases. Tuition has been going up faster than health care costs in the United States, and health care costs, at least until this year, health care costs have been going up dramatically. There is a lot of challenge and difficulty around both of these facts of life. And in Asia, you're looking at tuition or fee increases, and it's raising, especially in China, a good deal of concern among middle-class families about being able to send students to college. Just some examples of what we are facing internationally with regard to funding and affordability. Let me say a few more things about this issue of innovation and the changing landscape of higher education, because I think this trend, above all else, is going to shape our thinking going forward, our thinking about what higher education is, what it does, how it functions, what counts as education. I said a few moments ago that typically we've had traditional institutions, initially brick and mortar, offering degrees, sometimes credentials, public institutions. Well, we still have these institutions, and they do a fine job, but now they have lots of company. Private higher education, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit, and at least in the US we distinguish between private nonprofit and private for-profit, grown enormously. 30% of the enrollments worldwide in 2009 were in private nonprofit or for-profit institutions. We've seen an enormous growth in online learning, distance education. I've already mentioned the revival, if you will, of interest in competency-based education and assessment of prior learning. We're seeing an unbundling of the responsibilities of traditional institutions. Traditional institutions, we have faculty develop curriculum, we have support services, we have all kinds of academic support like libraries and information technology, all of that housed within the university and the responsibility of the university. We're seeing more and more now, however, of institutions picking up, buying curriculum that's been developed by others apart from the university. We're seeing more and more adjunct faculty who are not full-time, who may or may, who are not either tenure track thus or even not tenure track, but faculty coming in from a variety of sources. We see student support services being outsourced. In other words, a number of the main functions of the traditional university are being handled outside the university. Now, the university may buy those services, but it's one thing to buy curriculum, and it's another thing to have the curriculum established, developed by your full-time faculty. Episodic education, stop in, stop out, part-time. I may want a degree or certificate, I may not. That is the norm for education in the United States. Only 25% of our students are full-time degree-seeking students. It's becoming the norm in other places around the world. And big data, the enormous power of big data sets, large sets of data, and the analytic capacity driven by technology is affecting classroom teaching. We can evaluate some things instantaneously. It's affecting enrollments. We can say a very great deal about who enrolls and how and what makes sense for future enrollments. And it's affecting our ability to determine what's happening to students once they have attained a degree, whether it's going to work or earnings or some of the things that Joshua was mentioning this morning. But our analytic capacity has been so enriched and will continue to be enriched, and that is starting to have an impact on how we judge the quality of the work that we do, as well as having an impact on how we do the work that we want to do. Micro-credentialing, nano degrees, specializations. I'm taking 10 weeks worth of some kind of education, or I'm taking 3 short courses. And I want what Udacity, a good-sized MOOC in the United States, calls a nano degree. There are a couple companies that have established specializations, and they are offering certifications. But credentialing of units of education experience smaller than a degree starting to emerge. And then, as I've already mentioned, non-institutional education, whether it's massive open online courses or it's badges, some kind of digital acknowledgement of capacity or competencies that I have, and coursework being offered by private companies that are not higher education institutions. I ran across an interesting number, 3 big MOOCs in the United States, Udacity, edX, Coursera. 12 million students over the last few years have enrolled in the MOOCs from these companies. It's not to say they graduated, most of them did not. It's not to say that they're still enrolled, many of them are not, but they've attracted 12 million students in this rather short period of time. There are 3,850 MOOCs out there worldwide right now. Mozilla has identified 13 different platforms for badges, issuing over 1 million of those badges. We have a company in the United States, it's called Straighterline. It is a private company that offers coursework at a very, very low price, $99 for a course, or $199 US for a course. They now have registered over time 10,000 students, and they have transfer credit guarantees with 80 traditional institutions. In other words, they're not a higher education institution. They've established themselves, though, as a provider of higher education, and they've gotten 80 accredited, reliable, well-known institutions to accept their work. If I had a choice between a course that costs $99 and a course that costs $2,000, and they were equal in quality, what might I do? I think we'll see more from Straighterline. So, what I'm trying to convince you of, if I haven't done it, is that the changing landscape is unprecedented in the history of higher education. We have new sectors, this non-institutional private online that is emerging. We have new actors these private companies. We have new forms of credentialing, all to deal with. So when we talk about, well, what are we going to do about quality assurance, my bottom line, we need to take what is happening, the change in the higher education landscape, into account. Thank you. All right. In Chile, you one time had 8 universities, I read, and in 2011 had 177 universities, professional institutes, and technical schools. You've seen very significant growth. You've seen growth in enrollments, and you have had considerable debate and discussion. What's the right kind of law for higher education and quality assurance? What about regulation? What kind of agencies are needed to oversee higher education and quality assurance? You are not alone. These kinds of debates are going on in many, many places, and we are all looking for what's the right combination, what's the right set of relationships that keeps higher education quality high, that establishes a vibrant higher education sector. So, some of the international trends, some of the changes in particular in higher education. Well, what about quality assurance as it relates to all of this? Quality assurance has played a basic role in many of our societies for a very long time. Some societies for a longer time than others. We've been engaged in accreditation in the U.S. since the late 19th century, for example. We've had lots of experience, lots of opportunities to make a lot of mistakes, opportunities to learn from our mistakes. But what is its role? Taking a step back, what do we want from quality assurance? Why do we talk about it as much as we do? Well, we want external review of the quality and performance of our institutions. Yes, institutions and programs and departments have internal quality review practices and procedures, but we want to look, from the outside. In many, many countries, the preferred way of doing that is having academics review academics. We want quality assurance that will give us evidence of the capacity of a college or university or program and its results. And quality assurance in many countries is a form of communication. It's a form of communication about what the academy expects, what the standards are, when a college or university or program is establishing and maintaining itself within the academic community. Quality assurance builds public confidence. Very, very important role. We in the United States right now are living with a bit of a decline in public confidence. Not a lot, it's small, in higher education and quality assurance in accreditation. We're very worried about that, and we are working to change that. But the credibility of our institutions, the rigor of what we do, the integrity of higher education, all are essential to building public confidence. And historically, higher education promotes certain academic values, values of which we are very, very proud. And I'm talking about the tradition of academic freedom. I'm talking about the expectation that our leaders of colleges and universities are academic leaders, that they are leaders of society. We carry with us in the academic community the vision of an educated person. And we value education for intellectual development. Yes, it's important that education be about jobs. Yes, it's important that education be about earnings. But it is vitally important to all of our societies that education, higher education, be about intellectual development. How do we know whether quality assurance is successful? Let me suggest 4 answers to that question. One, students succeed. They graduate, they go on to undertake and are successful with their life goals. They are valued, productive members of society. We contribute through student success to educational and social mobility in our countries. Quality assurance is successful if institutions keep their promises. We make promises in a college catalog, whether it's print or electronic. We tell the public we will make certain kinds of experiences available. We tell the public that we will deliver education at a certain level of quality, going back to what I said a few moments ago, on which the public can rely. Quality assurance is successful if institutions have essential resources. You need faculty. You need curriculum. You need funding that meets program needs. You need facilities and equipment. Now, one of the things we get accused of in the United States all the time, especially with our accreditation of programs, is, oh, the faculty are using the accreditation as a way to ask for more money. All right, because if the accreditor says I have to have a new lab, or the accreditor says I have to have new facilities or more faculty, well, gee, my president isn't going to turn me down, or my chief academic officer. That's mostly not the case. What is the case is you cannot achieve student success without adequate resources. And when you run into difficulty, it is often because those resources aren't there. Money is not enough, but you cannot do it without money. Money is a necessary but not sufficient condition. And quality assurance is successful if institutions are meeting societal needs. We are there to serve students. We are there to serve the public. We are there to serve our country. We're the intellectual and cultural centers of our societies. We're pivotal when it comes to economic development, and increasingly the role we play in international competitiveness in a world in which service and knowledge jobs exceed manufacturing jobs, we're essential. So those are indicators, if you will, related to whether quality assurance is successful. Now, international trends in quality assurance, given the background from which we come. We're going to keep on reviewing traditional institutions, many of which are highly selected, a number of which are modestly selective. But we are in an era, as you know, of mass higher education, and quality assurance is addressing that as well. And a lot of the discussion in various countries, in places like UNESCO or OECD or the World Bank, is about how do we fine-tune quality assurance to address the growing enrollment and access being greatly expanded. Our quality review, I'm suggesting to you, will need to go beyond traditional institutions to those new providers, those non-institutional providers I mentioned earlier. I'm not sure how we're going to do that at all. That's a long discussion. But somehow or another, if episodic education that as much involves these non-institutional providers as well as traditional institutions becomes the norm, we need to be able to address quality in that context. We're also seeing country-based authority for quality and country-based locating responsibility for quality in individual countries is our history. We're seeing that authority now being augmented by regional and international authority. What I'm thinking about here is Bologna. I'm thinking about the European Bologna. I'm thinking about the European Quality Assurance Register for all quality assurance bodies that want to operate in Europe. I'm thinking about European standards and guidelines, and I'm seeing the replication of this regional approach in many areas throughout the world, where we still have country-based quality assurance, but it is being influenced increasingly by a regional and perhaps one day an international approach. One of the things that we do at CHIA is to house what we call the CHIA International Quality Group. And one of the topics we're looking at is, do we want to move toward a single set of international quality standards? And I can make a good argument, yes. I can make a good argument, no. But we're starting to explore, what would that mean? How could it come about? Is it desirable? So what I'm suggesting to you is that although our structure for quality assurance is grounded in a country-based approach, we are starting to see alternative structures out there being proposed, taking on a certain life as well. Finally, we're seeing peer review in many, many countries, but increasingly, and it goes back to my point about an expanded role of government and the urgency of quality in many countries, stakeholders and government more and more involved in the determination of quality. These are the kinds of things, when it comes to quality assurance, that we're talking about, that we're acting on. There are also new quality tools out there. If we were talking 25 years ago, I wouldn't have this slide up here at all, because we had very little, if any, of these tools. Qualifications frameworks in many countries, where we've arrayed different levels of education with specific competencies, and colleges and universities are expected to teach to those competencies. Some qualifications frameworks are for higher education. Some start with pre-kindergarten and go through doctoral education. But qualifications frameworks are a fact of life in many places. Rankings. Rankings, whether they're national or regional or international, play an awfully big role in quality discussions around the world. In the United States, I don't know whether it was Monday or Tuesday, U.S. News and World Report, we call them the granddaddy of the rankings, U.S. News and World Report published its international rankings for the first time, to go alongside, they hope, Times Higher or world rankings, or the other international ranking systems that are out there, and any number of countries have their own domestic rankings as well. We may not like rankings, some people do, a lot of people don't. They're a fact of life, and they are, in the eyes of the public, potential students, and other stakeholders, they are a form of judging quality. They're a quality tool. Interactive data sets, I'm thinking of U-Multirank in Europe in particular, or we have several such data sets in the United States, College Navigator, College Scorecard. These are databases. They're free. You go in them. You want to go to college. You want to attend a university. Well, here's where I want to go. Here's the type of institution I want to look at. Let me know how it performs. What's the likelihood of my getting student aid? What's the graduation rate? I'm going to look at 5 universities. What's the graduation rate of those universities? What happens to students? Do they get jobs? Do we know anything about their earnings? These are, in today's world, straightforward, easy ways to learn about what is likely, not guaranteed, likely to happen to you if you go to a particular institution. These two, the interactive data sets, are used more and more frequently to make a judgment about the worth of attending a particular institution. We have, as I indicated earlier, a trend toward regional and international quality standards, and I mentioned Bologna. These two, these regional emerging quality standards are another tool, and I don't know where the discussion, the international discussion about quality standards, a single set of international standards will take us. UNESCO is interested in a worldwide quality convention to augment the regional conventions they have as well. So the quality tools and quality assurance that addresses the changing landscape of higher education. Throughout all of this, we know one thing. We know that countries with strong colleges, institutes, universities have strong quality assurance systems. However, we're going to configure that quality assurance. So as we move forward with quality assurance, several points. One, we will need to rely on or develop our capacity for change. Change in quality assurance, like change anywhere, is very difficult. But we're not going to be able to be effective without changing in today's world. And that change needs to be informed by what we know about the changes in higher education and the changing expectations of quality that go along with changes in higher education. We will need to not only stick with our tried and true practices of standards, academics reviewing academics, making a judgment about the quality of an institution. We will be engaging, as some countries already are, some of these quality tools that were not available decades ago, whether it's interactive data sets or use of rankings or regional quality standards. And we are constantly rethinking our engagement with government. This will be ongoing, and that's really my essential point in the earlier conversation about regulation and self-regulation. I don't think we discover quality. I don't think it's something out there and I have to go find it. I think we decide it. So the issue is who decides it and under what conditions. Those issues are vitally important to all of us. We are going to be expanding the purview of quality review to a bigger universe, and we're not going to be able to put a lot of things aside. We're still going to be looking at selective institutions, but we're going to be looking at mass higher education as well. We'll be looking at institutions and other providers. We will be looking at the level of country, but internationally as well. And we're going to be using a variety of tools for this purpose. So in summary, with regard to self-regulation and regulation, we're ready for ongoing debate and engagement. The bottom line of the international trends in higher education is traditional higher education, and that's how we invented quality assurance, is only part of the future landscape for higher education. The future of quality assurance, I've been suggesting to you, is tied to embracing change and the non-traditional, and that when it comes to looking in a more specific way at quality assurance and what's happening with it, we are going to engage more actors, we are going to use more tools, and we are going to be working with a more engaged government. Thank you.
Agradecemos a la doctora Eaton por su intervención. A continuación vamos a dar paso a la ronda de preguntas. Reitero que ustedes pueden levantar la mano si es que tienen alguna pregunta o comentario escrito y se los retiraremos para hacerlo llegar. A quien va a moderar nuevamente este encuentro de preguntas, está con nosotros una vez más el profesor Sergio Campos, que recibirá las preguntas, hará comentarios, un resumen también de lo que acabamos de ver.
Tiene ya el... Bueno, ha sido muy clarificadora su exposición, doctora Eaton. Y surgen muchas preguntas que seguramente los presentes tienen para usted, pero yo quería plantearle algunas en relación con este concepto de la calidad y al mismo tiempo la autorregulación y la regulación que debe existir en el sistema educativo. De acuerdo con toda esta experiencia y la exposición conceptual que usted hizo, quiero ponerla a prueba con respecto a una situación que se da en nuestro país. En el caso de las universidades o carreras profesionales, en muchas ocasiones las carreras duran 5 años, 4 años, 6 años, dependiendo el área de conocimiento. Y resulta que la acreditación de esas carreras o esas universidades es a veces de 2 o 3 años. ¿Hasta qué punto le parece a usted consistente que esas universidades sigan funcionando en esas condiciones cuando hay una discrepancia entre el nivel de acreditación con el tiempo de los planes de estudio? Pensando que la acreditación, de acuerdo con la concepción chilena, tiene que ver con el cuerpo docente, los grados académicos, el currículum, la implementación, laboratorios, biblioteca, en fin, formación de asociación de egresados, completando el cuadro de la docencia, la investigación y la extensión, que son los 3 aspectos esenciales, digamos, de la concepción de universidad al estilo tradicional. Entonces vuelvo al comienzo y le pregunto que a la luz de esta calificación que se hace acá, hay acreditaciones que son de 2 o 3 años y carreras que duran 5 años. ¿Es consistente eso para usted o no?
If you're asking me, and I want to make sure about this, accreditation takes a fair amount of time, and that is a lot of time in comparison to the number of years it takes for students to complete a program, and that appears problematic. Is that the question?
Sí, claro, o sea, una carrera dura 5 años y la acreditación del Centro de Estudios Superiores es de 2 años. Ese es el punto. Si es consistente eso en función de la calidad.
One of the things a lot of us may need to be looking at is the length of time it takes to become accredited. This is something that's come up a good deal, especially recently in my country. I know, and there are good reasons why it takes the amount of time it takes to become accredited. On the one hand, I know that in at least some instances it could be done in a shorter period of time. The things you could look at: provisional accreditation, accreditation in stages. In the meantime, the program can operate. But I'm suggesting that we be creative about how we go about the accreditation in relation to the program being offered.
Ahora, con respecto a la calidad, concretamente, en el sistema estadounidense, ¿cuáles son los indicadores que marcan que hay una situación de calidad óptima, por ejemplo, en un centro de estudios superiores?
First, let me say this about the United States. All of accreditation in the United States is non-governmental, and that we take no money from the federal government. We were not created by the federal government. I said earlier that in the United States, accreditation goes back to the 19th century. There was no relationship with government at all until the late 1950s, the early 1950s in the United States. So accreditation predates government by a considerable period of time. Typically, accreditation looks at the major function areas of a college, university, or program. We have 85 different accreditors. 18 of them are institutional in nature. They look at the entire institution. And 67 of them are programmatic accreditors. All of accreditation All accrediting organizations were formed independently. They're funded independently. All right. Now, that said, the 85 all do some variant of looking at faculty, curriculum, student achievement, facilities, student support services, public information to the public and the integrity of it, and the finances of an institution. Each of the 85 has its own standards for this purpose. However, and each of them go about it in a slightly different way, but typically that is what accreditors examine when they are looking at an institution or program.
Hay un elemento que usted ha mencionado que es una preocupación también en Chile, que dice relación con la autorregulación. ¿Cómo se alcanza un proceso de autorregulación que se valide éticamente?
As we are reminded in the United States with some regularity, self-regulation, while it has many strengths, has potential weaknesses. Those weaknesses include professionals viewing one institution and then perhaps the professionals from that institution viewing the institution of some of the people who came into the first college or university, sometimes called back scratching. Those potential difficulties include conflict of interest, where you want an accreditation team to a university and gee, they're making you a job offer at the same time, and you're really not going to want to say anything very negative about that institution if you're interested in the job. Potential difficulties include an interest in a particular program, a family member connected to that program, for example, or they may include seeking some kind of what we call personal gain. Yes, there are potential pitfalls, but all accrediting organizations have policies to protect against those things happening. For example, you can't make the review a cozy, I'll take care of you, you take care of me, because the review must be addressed to the standards and meeting the standards. And typically there's a staff person from the accrediting organization that goes with a team to look at an institution. All accreditors have conflict of interest policies, things you cannot do or must declare, like a relationship with an institution if you're reviewing it, like family or other connections to a college or university that you would be reviewing, and like anything you might take. And it could be something as simple as a very small honorarium that you simply cannot take from a college or university. So we have balanced the potential difficulties of self-regulation with policy and procedures that protect against those potential difficulties becoming real difficulties. And it is something that is vitally important to the accrediting community and to higher education. The credibility of what we do rests on the success of accreditation. And the public is not going to have confidence if they don't see the process as transparent and above board. So the issue isn't, oh, there's something wrong with self-regulation. The issue is you have to do it in the right way in order to make it effective and not lead to problems. And having safeguards, having protections, making sure that self-regulation is scrutinized all the time and in a very demanding way is essential to maintaining self-regulation.
Bueno, hay preguntas de la audiencia. Francisco Martínez, jefe de la División de Educación Superior del Ministerio de Educación, dice: en Chile la acreditación es voluntaria y por años. ¿Qué opina de la propuesta que sea obligatoria por niveles de calidad?
I'm no expert on the Chilean higher education and quality assurance system, so it's difficult to address this question with the kind of information that I would need. What it seems to me is going on here is we want to make sure that our colleges and universities are functioning at a high level of quality. We have said as a country that we want to have quality assurance in the form of external review. We want others coming in and looking at an institution or a program. How you do that, whether it's mandatory or not, whether or not it involves levels, I have to defer to your judgment given your circumstances about whether or not to do that. We have an unusual situation, in some ways a bit similar, in the United States. You don't have to be accredited to operate. Any institution can obtain authority to operate, which is the phrase, and authority to operate as a higher education institution comes from one of our 50 states, not from the federal government in the United States. But you could become authorized to operate without accreditation, and you do not have to have accreditation. However, that said, if your institution is to be eligible for student grants and loans, if your institution wants to help students transfer to another institution once the student has accumulated some credits, if your institution wants to be viewed as credible and legitimate, you need accreditation. So it may be voluntary, but it is essential to successful operation as a higher education institution. And institutions make these choices, and there is ambiguity there, but it has worked for a very long time. Just one example, but I can't speak to mandatory or no levels or no for Chile.
Bueno, doctora Eaton, hay una pregunta de Alejandro Gutiérrez, director de Aseguramiento de Calidad del IAC, y dice lo siguiente: ¿existen en Estados Unidos estándares de acreditación para la modalidad online? De ser así, ¿cuáles son las principales diferencias entre esos estándares y dónde está el énfasis en el ámbito al momento de la evaluación?
Okay. Most of the accreditors in the United States have opted to use the same standards for site-based learning as for distance learning, online learning. And indeed, the typical form of online learning in the United States is a blend of online offerings with site-based offerings. That is, I'll take an online course and I'll take a classroom-based course, or I will take a course that involves some online work and some classroom work. So the accreditors have said, look, good teaching is good teaching, sound curriculum is sound curriculum. Having those standards makes sense. However, the evidence that is used to show whether or not a university meets those standards for good curricula or for strong faculty will vary based on whether we're talking about online learning or we're talking about face-to-face learning. For example, I've done just a little of this myself, but I've been told over and over and over again by faculty that what it takes to be a good faculty member in an online situation is different from what it takes to be a good faculty member in a face-to-face situation. Similarly with the way curricula is developed and used. So, with a few exceptions, the same standards are used for both online and face-to-face, but the evidence that will convince the accreditor that you're doing a good job with online will be somewhat different from the evidence that'll convince the accreditor you're doing a good job with site-based learning.
Hay una pregunta de Luis Quesada, director de Desarrollo Institucional de la Universidad de Santiago de Chile, USACH. Dice, en Estados Unidos se han definido estándares cuantitativos de calidad en la relación profesores full-time y número de estudiantes.
In some fields, yes, but in many instances, not. I said that there were 67 programmatic accreditors in the United States. About half of those accreditors are in health fields, nursing, dental hygiene, dentistry, medicine, physical therapy, radiologic technology. A good number of those fields do require student-faculty ratios for reasons of public health and safety. Oftentimes, those requirements come from the licensing boards for those professions. And the licensing boards, and we have primarily state-level licensing boards, work with the accrediting organizations if and when there are ratios. On the other hand, the institutional accreditors do not have such ratios in their various standards. So it is mixed and for different reasons.
Hay una pregunta de José Clantín, ¿puede ser? Sí, profesor de electrónica, sede Viña del Mar, dice, de la Universidad Técnica Federico Santa María. Dice, si en el proceso de acreditación a una institución le indican observaciones a su proceso formativo y se listaron debilidades existentes, ¿cómo o quién asegura que la institución ha establecido que está aplicando los procesos de mejoramiento comprometidos? ¿Es la propia institución la encargada de verificarlo?
Your microphone isn't on, so they can't hear you in the booth, so they can't translate. Can you make sure the mic is on?
¿El mío? ¿Ahí sí? Ya. ¿No está encendido el micrófono? Se habrá acabado la pila. ¿No está acreditado el micrófono? ¿El mío?
His mic's off.
¿El mío? Sí, está funcionando bien. ¿Me escucha? ¿Es
No, mine's
translator?
on.
¿Me está escuchando, no?
Yeah. No, it's this gentleman.
Este es el que me dice que no... No, pues yo encuentro que aquí adentro funciona, ¿no? El que no escucha en la cabina ya. ¿Me escucha en la cabina? ¿Ahora sí me escucha o no? Ahora sí me escucha. Creo que no escuchaba el traductor. Repito la pregunta.
Thank you.
Profesor de electrónica de la sede Viña del Mar de la Universidad Técnica Federico Santa María. Dice, si el proceso de acreditación a una institución le indican observaciones a su proceso formativo y se listaron debilidades existentes, ¿cómo o quién asegura que la institución ha establecido que está aplicando los procesos de mejoramiento comprometidos? ¿O es la propia institución la encargada de verificarlo?
I can tell you how we handle this in the U.S. if it's valuable, good. If institutional weaknesses are identified in the course of an accreditation review, if they're minor, the accreditor will probably leave it to the institution, to the university, to fix the problem and simply report it to the accreditors. Give us a report in a year and tell us that you fixed this and give us evidence that you did. All right, and they will follow up on the report. If it is very serious, on the other hand, all right, if it's a broad weakness in the institution, this will emerge as a concern from the accreditation review. And typically, there will be a special date set by which the institution has to provide evidence that it has taken care of the concern, or the accreditor will say, we are going to send in a special team of people to make sure that you fixed this weakness. It may be in a year or 2 years, it depends on what the issue is, or both. The accreditor may say, we want to report and we want to do another site visit to make sure you've addressed the concerns. And at the very least, the accreditor would say, look, you report annually to us. You give us data on a variety of issues, enrollment, budget, your audit, et cetera. We also want to know where you stand in your progress on this issue. So there are various ways to make sure that the matter does not simply language, the concern's been identified and nobody is looking at it. The accreditor does follow up, and there are various mechanisms for doing that.